Yeah,
Yeah, I don't think it's recording.
okay, here we go.
There we go.
Ah, there's not one thing. Well, welcome everybody to the Path of Awakening course. Um, and we are sort of pushing our way slowly into volume 3 of the Profound Treasury of the Ocean of Dharma by Chogyam Trungpa. This is on the Vajrayana stage of the path, Tantra. And so it's the most precious and the most esoteric, and perhaps the most dangerous in a way, subject to misunderstanding and misinterpretation. And so we're going slowly. And we are going to be reading, we have read a few chapters from Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, because a lot of what is in that book is an excellent introduction, foundation for studying the Vajrayana. And tonight, we're doing the first 2 chapters. We're going over them. Actually, we're doing the introduction, which is a chapter in itself. It's very rich. And chapter 1, which is called Spiritual Materialism. And really, what these teachings are about in these 2 chapters are what Trungpa Rinpoche taught us to call spiritual materialism. And what spiritual materialism is, in fact, what materialism is altogether, and there are 3 styles of materialism, which we're going to come to. But basic materialism means seeing and manipulating the world for the purposes of ego. This imaginary self that we carry around with us and constantly see the world through it, and in terms of its fears and hopes and desires. And the manipulation of our world to satisfy the hopes, the fears, and the desires, and so forth of ego are what is called materialism, what he's calling materialism. Spiritual materialism is the use of spirituality itself to bolster and build on ego, which is a total perversion, because the real meaning of spirituality is to transcend or cut through or see through ego. Ego, as Trungpa Rinpoche once bellowed, is a lie. It's not true. The idea that I am a discrete, ongoing, independent entity is just not true. In fact, what's real is just this constant arising and passing away in this present moment of whatever it is that we see, hear, smell, taste, touch, and think. It has no central organizing point. It is a constant and ever-changing display, just like the images on your computer screen. And we can relate with that. So these teachings, these first 2 chapters, are based on talks that Rinpoche gave, Trungpa Rinpoche, in 1970 and 1971 in Boulder. And they were used as the foundation for the first book of his, published in the United States, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And he wanted to warn us of these dangers, the dangers of spiritual materialism, as well as give an overview of the path to clarify confusion. Warnings about ego-oriented sidetracks and versions of spirituality, these are the warnings against spiritual materialism, which totally obscures the true path, the true understanding. There are many forms of self-deception, and that's what materialism is. It's a form of lie, self-deception. And it's a problem common to all spiritual disciplines, not just Buddhism, theistic and non-theistic. To use spirituality in the service of I, me, which is very selfish and limited. The Buddhist approach isn't a matter of building something up, like becoming a better person, but rather of cutting through and burning out our confusion to uncover the awakened state of mind, which is in all of us from get-go. It is fundamentally what we actually are, this awakened state of mind. It was there all the time, and it's still there now, and it's actually enlightenment. and produces enlightenment. But we cover it over with this myth of I, which we defend endlessly, this I, because it doesn't really exist. As soon as we say it, it's already dying. I, gone. You have to keep it alive. You have to keep all kinds of stratagems going, occupations to keep I busy and seemingly there. And as soon as you stop those stratagems and occupations, there is no I, because it's just a false statement. Enlightenment, he says, is permanent because we haven't produced it. It's our fundamental nature. It's who and what we are. We merely discover it in meditation practice. We glimpse the awakened state from time to time, more or less, some of us. It's like the analogy that's used all the time for this is like the sun appearing behind the clouds, from behind the clouds. The sun is the intelligence, the burning, bright intelligence of the awakened state of mind, which is in us all the time. But it's up there in the sky and it gets obscured by clouds passing in front of it. Those clouds are the thoughts about me and my world, what am I doing with my world? And those thoughts come and go, just like clouds come and go. And when they go, the sun is revealed again, more or less. And so what our job is to uncover that sun and begin to actually feel it, live it, appreciate it. It contains freedom, it contains wisdom, it contains true knowledge of reality. Now we might think that this is a very difficult and unusual undertaking, that, how can it be all these millions of billions of trillions of confused samsaric beings, that means confused, samsara, caught in samsara, caught in these false beliefs. But from the point of view of a Buddha, we're the minority. The Buddhas are the majority. In fact, they're not even a majority because they don't have any true independent existence. They are just this constant sky with the sun shining of reality. And then there are these little beings that appear, us, suffering because we believe in a personal existence and struggle to maintain it. He says, I'm quoting, the heart of confusion is that man and woman, has a sense of self which seems to be continuous and solid. Actually, it is transitory and discontinuous. But we struggle to maintain and enhance this fictional solid self. And with all kinds of stratagems, even suffering is a stratagem for maintaining the self, because then there's the I who suffers. We constantly focus on that. Someone asked Rinpoche once, what is the purpose of fear? And he answered, to prove that I exist, because I'm the one who's afraid. It's a game that we struggle, a painful, unhappy game that we get trapped in. He says, we become so absorbed in our confused, ego-oriented view of the world, that we consider it real, the only possible world. And so really what the path is about is introducing us to a different and new and fresh and real way of seeing, not a fictional one. So he describes materialism in terms of what are called the three lords of materialism. Now, I'll just give you, this is the wonk in me coming out, I guess, but the word for these lords in Tibetan is lalo. That means lord or dominator. And so it's the lalo sum. Sum means three, so it's the three lords. And it's interesting, you see, in many languages, well, for instance, in Greek, you can look it up. The etymology of the word barbarian in Greek comes from the Greeks' feeling that anyone who didn't speak Greek was savage, and that actually what they were saying sounded like bar, 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 bar. So they were barbarians. That's the etymology. You can find it in Webster and in the Oxford English Dictionary. And I strongly see cultures, especially pre-20th century, but even in the 20th century, are so ethnocentric, so politicocentric and ethnocentric. They think that they're the only legitimate culture. The Chinese, they made this huge division between Han Chinese, which are the native Chinese, native to China, and all the other barbarian so-called peoples who came in, like the Manchus and the what's that? I'm sorry, a senior moment, but there are lots of different tribes that came across Central Asia, conquered China, ruled it for centuries, and then were thrown out and replaced by the Han again. The Han is the legitimate, it's not the legitimate, it's just the purebred Chinese. So the word for these non-Chinese people, get this, uh, that's it. uh, that's the word for non-Chinese, for Manchu or whatever. And in Tibet, the word for barbarian, for anyone who didn't speak Tibetan, was Lalo. Lalo, because it sounds like, they're just saying Lalo, 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 instead of saying anything meaningful. So anyhow, that's kind of fun. But these three lords are the Lord of Form, the Lord of Speech, and the Lord of Mind. These are three different styles of enslaving us. Why is this important? It's important because when you get to the Vajrayana, it's exotic, it's foreign. It came to the United States and to the West from a place that was almost unreachable, Tibet. And it was very, very subject to distortion, to appreciating it as an exoticism, as something rare and precious, and not understandable. And in fact, when Tibetan Buddhism came to the West, there were many people selling it. Just like in the Sadhana of Mahamudra, where he talks about them selling the Dharma. It's corruption. They were using it to bolster their own self-importance and saying, look, I'm a person who can teach you this very esoteric and strange and hard to understand art, the Vajrayana. And it was baloney. Not that it isn't hard to understand, it takes work, but it's not this thing that bolsters our ego, our sense of importance, self-worth. It's really what the Vajrayana is all about, is a powerful, precise, and beautiful explanation of what is real. So he wanted to warn us about this. And he talked about the three lords of materialism. These are three ways that ego uses experience to bolster its own existence. And the first one is the Lord of Form. The most common version of the Lord of Form has to do with the acquisition of wealth. That you think by building up your own personal wealth, you're going to bolster your own existence, your well-being, and your ongoing existence. So you go out and you try and make your world really rich and wealthy. There's a flip side to this, though. I mean, I used to know people, especially in the Zen world, who would flip it. And they would say, I'm going to live a very, very simple life. There's a virtue in simplicity. You remember, I don't know if some of you are old enough to remember the slogan, never own anything you can't fit in your VW Bug. That was in the 60s. And so there was this ethic of simplicity. And that can be the Lord of Form too, because what you're doing is manipulating the physical, material world in order to achieve some kind of feeling of well-being. The Lord of Speech is the use of intellect, ideologies of all kinds, political, philosophical, religious, in order to feel that you are in the right place, on the right path, that you are living the virtuous life because you believe in the right politics. You're a Democrat and not a Republican. You're a Catholic and you're not a Muslim, whatever it might be. And we use ideology, could be Buddhism too, to bolster ego, that we are superior. We're in the right place because we have the right ideologies and beliefs. That's the use of the Lord of speech, and that enslaves us to ideas, and it can get very cruel indeed. And finally, the Lord of mind is the attempt to use consciousness itself to maintain awareness of itself through the use of spiritual and psychological disciplines. Could be drugs, could be yoga, could be prayer, meditation, trances, psychotherapies. It's the manipulation of mind itself in order to achieve some kind of happiness. All of these, the three lords, have nothing to do with the real world. They are manipulations about having to do with self-aggrandizement, either of material things, concepts, or spiritual practices. And in Buddhism, the classic example of the Lord of Spirit of Mind would be the achievement of trance states. You focus one pointedly on an object, and it can be very blissful, and you think that you've done something profound. But the problem is you haven't, because you haven't really penetrated into reality. What you've done instead is like taking a drug. You've focused your mind one pointedly on some object, and the objects get more and more attenuated and ethereal as you move up through the different stages of this. And it's pleasurable, it's delightful, and it's nowhere. In fact, there are stories in Tibet of yogis who went off into caves and practiced these trance states. They're called the dhyanas. Dhyana literally means meditation, but in this instance, it refers to these trance states. And it's the 6 realms. You all are probably familiar with that. These are the different psychological realms of being. And they are in what's called the Kama Dhatu. Kama means desire world. And the desire world is divided up into the 6 realms: the gods, the jealous gods, human beings, animals, hungry ghosts, and hell beings. And there's that whole teaching about that. But there are 2 more dhatus, 2 more realms above the realm of desire. And these are the realms having to do with pure concentration of the mind. The first one is called the realm of pure form, and the second one is called the formless realm. And in each one of these realms, you do one of 4 meditations. You could call them meditations. They're concentration states where you lock your mind one pointedly onto an object. And it gets very, very ethereal. So that in the last one, the formless realm, you're meditating on things like space. You're meditating on pure consciousness. You're meditating on not this and not that. You're meditating on not this and not that. And what they say about people who get stuck in these realms, and you can get stuck in them for a long time in these formless and pure form realms of pure mental concentration, that when a yogi does, they can stay in them for eons, and their bodies will wither away until, as it says in the texts, all that is left is a palpitating heart. And they've just gotten stuck, and it's a bad place to get stuck, because sooner or later, that yogi is going to wake up and realize that they're in a dead end. And then the feeling of disillusionment and disappointment is so great that it can plunge them down into the hell realm. So there are teachers like Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who some of you may have met. He died about in the early 1990s, and he was, in his day, probably the most revered teacher in Tibet. And he went around finding yogis in caves who had gotten stuck in these trance states and waking them up. Telling them, got to get on with it, get on with your meditation. You're stuck in a bad place. So these are the 3 lords. Yeah, he says, although the Lord of Mind, which I've just been describing, psychotherapies can be the Lord of Mind if you pursue them for some kind of feeling of pleasure rather than an entrance into reality, into waking up. and seeing the world as it truly is, and oneself as one truly is. And although the Lord of Mind is the most powerful in subverting spirituality, he says, still the other two lords can also rule the spiritual practice. So you can become an ideological wonk of Buddhism or Catholicism or Islam or whatever. And that's the Lord of Speech. And you can surround yourself with tankas and statues of the Buddha or, images of Christ or whatever it might be. And this is an example of the Lord using the Lord of Form in a spiritual way, all to the purpose of making yourself feel better rather than somebody's going to have to tell this 222156 that they're too late, rather than the pursuit of reality, which is what spirituality is all about. It's about opening oneself to the real world with generosity, with clarity, with wisdom, and with skill, constant responsiveness, compassion. Compassion really is a word for constant responsiveness. He says the Lords rely on the myth of the solidity of I. How to discover that this is a myth, a lie? The Buddha discovered meditation. That struggling to find answers did not work. It was only when there were gaps in his struggle that insights came to him. And that's the same for us. As we practice, we are letting go of self-consciousness and coming back into clear, open, unself-conscious awareness of this present space. Right now, boom, here we are, clear, awake, present. We can do this all the time, and it is the practice to come back to this awareness, clear and open, effortless, of what is happening in the present moment. It's always here. That's the beauty. It's here waiting for us. He says the practice of meditation involves letting be, trying to go with the pattern, trying to go with the energy and speed, knowing these factors for what they are and working with their pattern. That means that we're just right here in constant responsiveness. That responsiveness, by the way, is really a word that is usually translated in the jargon, compassion. Buddhas are endlessly compassionate, and what it means is they're constantly in response to what the world presents. He says, in your meditation practice, you should not impose anything too forcefully on your mind, nor should you let it wander. That is the teaching of the letting the mind be in a very open way, of feeling the flow of energy without trying to subdue it and without letting it get out of control, of going with the energy pattern of mind. This is meditation practice. And the Buddha told a sitar player who came to him and asked him how to meditate. He told him, how do you tune your instrument, the strings on your sitar? And the musician said, well, not too tight and not too loose. And that's the way we tune our minds, not too tight, not too loose, just here, clear, awake, effortless. So our mental gossip, our discursive thoughts, these are the Lord's first line of defense in their effort to deceive us, and we are convinced of our existence. The Lords rely on our thoughts to blind us. And then here I'm just quoting, in true meditation, there is no ambition to stir up thoughts, nor is there an ambition to suppress them. That's a key one. Nor is there an ambition to suppress thoughts. They are just allowed to occur spontaneously and become an expression of basic sanity. They become the expression of the precision and clarity of the awakened state of mind, just like anything else, just like these forms, sounds, if there's some smells around, tastes, tactile sensations, the feeling of your bottom on the cushion, whatever it might be, thoughts, all of them are arising and passing away in the moment, and they are real in the instant. They have no true existence. They're just a constant display. In meditation, we neither encourage emotions nor repress them. We just allow them to be as they are. They can't entertain or distract us. They become the inexhaustible energy which fulfills egoless action. If we just see them and let them be, and they dissolve. As soon as we see something, a thought or an emotion, it dissolves. That's almost disappointing, but that's the case. It's only when we follow them, get involved in them, and then we're in the action of ego. Meditation involves seeing the transparency of concepts so that we're not solidifying our world, our image of ourself. And the Lords have other defenses which aren't discussed here, he says. So the Buddha discovered that there is no need to struggle to be free. The absence of struggle in itself is freedom. It's the egoless state of Buddhahood. Any struggle, any attempt to make things right is more ego. We are just resting in this awareness and seeing whatever it is that presents itself to us now. The process of transforming the material of mind from expressions of ego's ambition into the expressions of basic sanity and enlightenment through the practice of meditation. This might be said to be the true spiritual path. I'm going to read that again. The process of transforming the material of mind from expressions of ego's ambition into expressions of basic sanity and enlightenment, awareness in the moment, through the practice of meditation, which is saying the same thing, awareness in the moment. This might be said to be the true spiritual path. The second chapter that we were assigned, cutting through, it's on spiritual materialism, is really all about the same thing. How ego can subvert anything for its own use, including spirituality. Ego can become our spiritual advisor. And there are lots of people out there selling spirituality. And you can sort of, after a while, when you've been on this path, you begin to get a feel for the people who are using spirituality for some kind of self-aggrandizement, self-promotion. Whenever we have dualistic notions such as, I am doing this because I want to achieve the particular state of consciousness, the particular state of being, then automatically we separate ourselves from the reality of what we are. The simplicity of meditation means just experiencing ego and not trying to get rid of it, because that's more ego. Just seeing it. And as you see it, it dissolves. If anything more than this is laid onto our psychology, it becomes very heavy, a thick mask, a suit of armor of who I'm going to be. I'm going to be this professional Buddhist. We need to step out of ego's constant desire for a higher, more spiritual, more transcendental version of knowledge, religion, virtue, judgment, comfort, or whatever it is that the particular ego is seeking, stepping out of spiritual materialism, self-aggrandizement. But our vast collection of knowledge and experience are just part of ego's display. And so we can fall prey to the seduction of receiving so-called higher teachings. But when we do, we just create a junk shop, a shop where we have collected a lot of stuff, mantras, visualizations, practices, styles of dress. Maybe we're going to wear robes, all kinds of things. He says, if we regard knowledge as an antique, an ancient wisdom to be collected, then we are on the wrong path. And this is transmitted, this whole understanding, by a lineage of teachers, handing this down, not as an antique or a possession. He says, rather, one teacher experiences the truth of the teachings, that this is real. And he or she hands it down as inspiration to the student. That inspiration awakens the student. as the teacher was awakened before. Then the student hands down the teachings to another student, and so the process goes on. So the teachings are always up to date. They aren't ancient wisdom. An old legend is a very real experience, and they're constantly changing to fit the times and to fit the people, because we are different than the people who studied this in Tibet 5 centuries ago or whatever. And so the teachings are constantly being molded, changing, adapting as we change, as the people of this time change. Trungpa Rinpoche loved America. He loved the jargon. He learned all these sort of Western idioms. And I mean, he used to say to us, please don't go on any trips. That was back in the day when everybody was doing LSD and all that stuff. He says, please don't go on any trips, using it as a double entendre. And then I remember one time he was getting on an airplane and we were all waving goodbye to him at the airport. And he turned around and said, have a nice trip. So he was constantly using the slang and the jargon. He enjoyed it. So you're not imitating your guru, not trying to become a replica of your teacher. The teachings are an individual personal experience, right down to the present holder of the doctrine, which is you and me and all of us individually. It was a living experience for the teachers of the Kagyu lineage, that was Trungpa Rinpoche's lineage, and it continues to be a living experience. Only the details of the life situations are different. These teachings, he says, and he said this over and over, are like warm, fresh-baked bread. It must be eaten fresh, right out of the oven while it's still warm. That's what the teachings are like. They're alive, they're warm, they're here, and they nourish us. He says there is no deception in terms of collecting knowledge and esoterica, chanting, all kinds of stuff. It is a lonely and individual path, because in the last analysis, each one of us is responsible for validating the understanding and the value that we get from treading this path. He said, in the Q&A, I'm just going to pick a few things but he says, the US is so fertile that there are so many charlatans who want fame and money. And they were all over the place when he was teaching, all kinds of people. I shouldn't name them by names because I'll be slurring them, but there were people teaching Kundalini yoga, where you raise energy up your spine, and people were so into that, and all kinds of stuff. I can't think of, gimmicks. People getting rich off it, learning how to chant. Kirtan. Kirtan is chanting in groups. And somebody asked, did Shakyamuni need a trace of ego after his enlightenment to enable him to teach? And the answer is no. The teachings just happened. He did not have the desire to teach or not to teach. One has no choice. You are there, an open person. Then the situation presents itself and teaching happens. That is called Buddha activity. And there are, in the realm of reality, there are what are called, we're going to be studying this more, the 3 bodies of the Buddha. The Dharmakaya, Kaya means body, Dharma means truth or teachings. The Sambhogakaya, which is often translated as the enjoyment body or the speech body of the Buddha. And the Nirmanakaya, which is alternately translated as the presentation body. Means like a person is a Nirmanakaya, but it also means the compassion body. And really what it's saying is that in reality, in the mind of a Buddha, there are these 3 core fundamental aspects. The first, the Dharmakaya, is freedom from belief in anything, including belief that I or anything, this mouse, anything exists in any true way. It's just a constant, never-changing display. And then the second body of the Buddha says that while nothing has any true existence, nonetheless, as things seem to appear and disappear, this mouse, they communicate what they are, their color, their shape, their form, their function, their sound. All these things are communicated. That's the Sambhogakaya, and it's sometimes called the enjoyment body of the Buddha. And the third body, the Nirmanakaya, which manifests as individual teachers, enlightened teachers, is called the compassion body. It's because in enlightenment itself, there is nothing left to do for the person, the individual who is enlightened, the Buddha, except to relate to whatever presents itself. And what is presenting itself are the myriad, the endless numbers of confused beings, samsaric beings. And the Buddha constantly relates to them out of love, compassion, and in a way that is going to help them become free from suffering. He says, right and wrong are out of the picture. You're not working on any side, neither the good side nor the bad side. How about that one? But you are working with the totality of the whole, beyond this and that. Someone asks, is faith useful? He says, not blind faith, but indestructible confidence. Yes, that indestructible confidence comes as we begin to realize that this core awareness that we all have and that we can tune into at any moment is indestructible, awake, clear, precise. He calls it indestructible confidence. Blind faith is naive, hopeful, self-aggrandizing. Faith as confidence is working with your intelligence. Your intelligence is this open, clear awareness that sees things as they are in the present moment, without fear or doubt. So sure of yourself that you do not have to check yourself. Absolute confidence. And the lack of confidence is regarded as the chief evil that people can experience on the path. Well, finally, the question comes up, why is it so hard to let go of ego, this I? His answer, people are afraid of the emptiness of space. When you let go of I, we're just living in this space. Though the real experience might not be so, it is generally a fear of space, a fear that we will not be able to anchor ourselves to any solid ground, that we will lose our identity as a fixed and solid and definite thing. This is what ego is afraid of. This could be very threatening to ego. And so ego comes up with all these different stratagems to keep itself busy in dialogue. I want, I think, I'm afraid, I hope, I fear. It's all proving that I is here. So it's a very simple message. It's absolutely fundamental to the whole path, but especially to the Vajrayana, which gets less and less compromising. It becomes more and more fierce about reality and about not lying, about truth. And so it's a good introduction. We're going to go on and study some other key concepts that he presents in Cutting Through, just a few. We're not going to do the whole book, a couple more chapters. So we can have a discussion. Meg.
I'm just curious with the timing of this, that we stopped doing the Vajrayana book and we moved to this book. And is it because you are afraid that some of us might get full of the concepts because we're moving into higher teachings? Is this sort of a warning?
It's that, but it's also a confirmation. It's an expression of confidence in you. And it's a reaffirmation of one of the very fundamental principles of Buddhism altogether, and especially the Vajrayana. Non-acquisition, non-bolstering of self. That one is learning to rest in reality whatever it is that you find is real. And it's completely up to each one of us to make that determination. So it's very fundamental. And Trungpa Rinpoche felt it was very fundamental to studying the Vajrayana, this introduction to spiritual materialism. And also, we're going to study Shunyata. We're going to read the chapter on Shunyata in Cutting Through, because I don't feel that people have gotten a good enough understanding of it, of Shunyata, emptiness. And it is core. It is one of the foundational principles of the Vajrayana, emptiness. And this is a chapter which the current head of Buddhist studies at Naropa University once said is the best short description of emptiness, of Shunyata, in print. So it's really good. So we're going to study that, and then some collateral concepts, having the chapter on prajna and compassion, all of which comes out of the understanding on Shunyata. I feel like this is very foundational to Tantra, and it pervades all of Tantra. The understanding of emptiness, prajna, compassion especially. The teachings on compassion are so beautiful because they have to do with the fact that when one begins to connect with these gorgeous teachings and experience the world as it truly is, which is quite beautiful, then one is inspired to help others genuinely. It's a big part of the Mahayana, and it just continues into the Vajrayana. Thanks, that was a great question. Who else?
Well, Michael and Sue have a hand up there.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I was just going to say that this was the book that actually brought me to Boulder 44 years ago. And it's interesting. I've read it again many times over. I think one of the things that's really powerful about these chapters is that you could read them as a Hinayana practitioner, a Mahayana practitioner, or a Vajrayana practitioner and get something out of it because it's so key to the whole thing. And I think that it's valuable for us to read because the biggest danger in the Vajrayana, having to go astray, particularly with Vajrayana practices, is the spiritual materialism, is exactly what he says. And the key word, it says the Lord of Mind refers to the effort of consciousness. So it's when we try to make something happen or try to hold on to something that we're not doing what he says just 2 pages before, where he talks about that the awakened state of just the spiritual path is just uncovering the awakened state of mind. If we try to create the awakened state of mind, we go astray. And that's the real danger, particularly in the Vajrayana. But the question I had for John is, since you were one of the editors of the book, at some point I'd be curious to hear something about, just how this book came together. But we
Sure.
could wait. We could wait and see what
Tremendous privilege. Yeah, it was a tremendous privilege. We went over every word with him, and after this, he never did that again. He never worked that closely with the editors including Myth of Freedom, which Mai and Marvin Casper also edited, and he didn't work that way with us. But with this book, it was the first book published in America, and we were very uneducated about Buddhism. We were new to it. We had some understanding that he had given us, but not like this. So we went over every single word and rewrote it, especially the chapter on Shunyata. And in fact, we did that for some months here in Boulder. And then we decided to finish it, and we rented a cabin at the mouth of the Russian River in California, up in Mendocino. And we went there for 3 weeks and finished editing, cutting through there. Yeah.
Thank you.
It was great privilege to do that. Anybody else?
Well, Linda and Philip and Judith.
Oh, good.
So if I could, this piggybacks on what Michael was saying in the beginning. And it goes back to when Chogyam Trungpa was talking about the three lords. My version of the book is on the top of page 8, but I guess we've got different versions, so I'll just read it. He says, even though the Lord of Mind is the most powerful in subverting spirituality, still the other two lords can also rule the spiritual practice. And what's coming up next is where my question is. He says, retreat to nature, isolation, simple, quiet, high people, all can be ways of shielding oneself from irritation. All can be expressions of the Lord of Form. So I stopped there because it seems to me that for millennia, Buddhist monks have been retreating to nature and isolation and living a simple and a quiet, contemplative life to achieve awakening, enlightenment, to diminish their ego. And yet here, if I'm reading it correctly, he suggests that those very things can get in the way of that effort. So I was wondering what your spin on that, what your take on that might be.
Michael?
I think it's very similar actually to what he says about the Lord of Form. And I mean, it's really, I think it's clear here, although it cuts through all three, that the problem isn't air conditioning, the problem isn't retirement plans, the problem, it's our attachment and craving and our expectations and beliefs about what these things are going to do for us, so that they end up becoming just what we talked about when we read Shambhala, The Sacred Path of a Warrior. They become a cocoon and a way to avoid things rather than actually opening ourselves up or becoming open to the world. So it's not the things themselves that's the problem. It's the attachment, the craving, the belief that it's going to create some kind of happiness or security or comfort, and using that to, push the world away and not open ourselves up. But no, I think that, obviously we, sit in sitting meditation because stillness and not being involved in other activities and having a relatively quiet environment, it's easier for us to, recognize our mind. But, it's how it's used. That can become a refuge too, in a cocoon as well. So it's not in the things themselves. It's in how we're using them, how we're approaching them, what we believe they are for us. Does that make sense?
I guess so. So I hear you saying that you want to avoid using these things as a goal in themselves, but rather just a tool to move you along the path. Is that sort of what you're saying?
I think so. I think it comes down to, are we opening up, or are we using these as like some kind of defense or some kind of identity, some kind of credential, something we're clinging to?
Okay. Yeah, for myself personally, I don't think I'm trying to hide in the wilderness, but surely the fewer distractions that there are around me, the easier it is for me to move forward.
For most of the people in this room, retreat into, meditation practice of isolation, when you can do it, when you can actually handle it, is very good, very powerful. It can be subverted, but I think that takes a very sort of professional subverter to do that. I don't know too many people, but I have met people who sort of wear their retreats as credentials. That's a perversion. But what retreat is about, Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, when you go into retreat, you just eat, shit, sleep, and meditate. It's an opportunity to meet your own mind. Because usually we're so distracted by entertainments of all kinds, including jobs, worries, work, entertainments, TV, friends. And when you go into retreat, you strip all that away. So that's the way it should be. But I've met people who I think use retreat and similar things as credentials. Can be done. But we're not going to do it. We're going to do it genuinely. And we have people in this room who've gone on individual retreats a lot. Some people who will remain nameless. You know who they are.
You know who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Individual
no,
retreat
Linda
is
and
so
Judith.
powerful. Solitary retreat is really powerful. You're just alone with your own noggin. But you have to be careful with it too.
There were questions from Linda and Judith, and
Okay, I'll just quickly, so a standard dictionary definition of confidence is the feeling or the belief in something, either yourself or something outside of you. Is the confidence, can you distinguish between that definition and probably most people's understanding and the confidence that you mentioned here?
There's a difference, for sure. The confidence that he's referring to is the discovery of your naturally clear, effortless, awake intelligence. And that, because it is effortless, because there's no creator to it, it has complete confidence that it is true, real. There is no effort in it whatsoever, because it's our fundamental nature. It's who we actually are. All of the little lack of confidences, self-doubts, these are come and go. And they're sort of self-attack, the form of self-attack and unhappiness. Meanwhile, this sky of awareness never departs. It's always here. The little thoughts go across it and distract us. But that sky is always there. That's the confidence. That was a great question, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just say something about that confidence idea. It becomes, I think, a deeper knowing that is unshakable once you, or as you gradually become sure of it. So then I think that's another way of putting the confidence in this different way of seeing the world and your role in it, I guess.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, it's a
Sorry.
a deepening knowing that this is so, that you come to, I suppose. It probably in small steps, and then perhaps longer, and then once you're really in it, you're in it for sure and for good. But what struck me was the simplicity that's this knowing, and how much energy and how much time we have all spent doubting it, entertaining ourselves away from it, thinking it must be something more complicated, when really it's so simple. You know? It's fantastic. The structures that I certainly erect and make conditions and this and that, and and improvements, and it's exhausting to even think of it. So that's all.
Said. Well said. Yeah, the path just gets simpler and simpler as we progress along the path. Yeah, well said. Anybody else? Well, we'll have a discussion group tomorrow. And anybody else before we end? Sally.
I'll just expand a bit on what Michael said. Michael said that you can read this as a Hinayanist, a Mahayanist, a Vajrayanist. I think you can read it as an anybody. And one of my fantasies is that this book be required reading for anybody of any religion, anywhere in the world. You can read it as a Catholic, a Jew, a Muslim, a Hindu, whatever. For me, it's one of the seminal texts of all religions. I think it's fantastic. So I don't have a question, just making an editorial comment. And thank you, Michael.
I would say that I read this book shortly after it came out, and I certainly didn't know anything about Buddhism or meditation, but man, it just seemed so true. It really moved me, got to me.
Yeah.
Astonishing clarity.
Meg, do you have anything more? You always have good things to say. Well, okay, let's end. Let's see. Michael and Sue, are you going to put the chants up, or should I, or what?
I'm gonna let's see. I have to get my gong, get the gong up, and I can do the chants. But you have
I
to.
have them right here. I can put them up if you'd like.
Okay, go ahead.
Just give me a sec, because I was just looking right there. Books, chants, boom, and dial up the right ones. Well, we've done the dedication, so this is just prayer for peace and dedication.
Right.
Well, okay then. So mute everybody.
So we'll close with a prayer for peace, and by dedicating the merit generated through our practice and study for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times, and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other.
By this.
By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, everybody. Wonderful
Thank
discussion.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank
Great
you.
choice.
Henry or Henri?
Be well.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Henry?
Bye, everybody.
Good night.
That's
Good
it. Okay.
night.
It's quick.